Hello, my name is Reggie Chapman. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Director of Policy at the Fortune Society's David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy. We welcome you to Both Sides of the Bars, which is a discussion-driven show that examines the criminal legal system from various perspectives, including people most impacted by the system. Here we discuss critical questions about how the criminal legal system works, its intersections with social justice, and the efforts that advocates are making to improve the lives of everyone affected. We ask that you, the viewers, spread the word about both sides of the bars and share your comments with us on Twitter, also known as X at X, the Fortune SOC. Today's show is titled Trauma-Informed Care in Reentry Spaces. The conversation explores what trauma-informed care looks like in reentry spaces. As we have come to realize, reentry should be the opposite of incarceration. It should be healing rather than punitive. Programs that practice trauma-informed care focus on safety, community, and empowerment. By emphasizing respect, compassion, and people's strengths instead of punishment or shame, these environments help returning citizens stabilize, reduce recidivism, and rebuild their lives with dignity. This episode features the preeminent scholar and practitioner in providing trauma-informed care in reentry spaces, Dr. Bahiyyah Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad is Associate Professor of Criminology in the Department of Sociology and Criminology at Howard University, where she discusses what it looks like to support, acknowledge, and heal the wounds of systemic trauma within reentry spaces. She also works at several prisons throughout the country providing these services. Dr. Muhammad has also authored 2 children's books titled Mommy is Coming Home and Daddy is Coming Home that focus on the reentry of parents. Good afternoon, Dr. Muhammad. We're excited to have you here to discuss this very important topic.
Good afternoon. I'm very honored to be here with you today, and thank you so much for such a beautiful introduction.
Thank you as well, Doc. We're honored to have you here. And so basically, we kind of just want to jump into the questions to get to the heart of discussing this very, very, very important topic. And so my first question for you is that incarceration affects the entire system, as we know. Throughout your research and field service work, please help us unpack this more. How is the entire family affected, and in what ways are they affected?
Yes, thank you so much for your question. I think when we think about incarceration, oftentimes we think about individuals. We don't think about families. We don't think about communities. Everybody is affected on the level of the family. When an individual leaves out of that household, there's an effect on the children, there's an effect on the income. We often call this the collateral consequences. And I think that is why we ultimately look at it just financially, but not looking at the presence of the individual in the household. When a father is incarcerated and the male dominance and presence is no longer in the community, is no longer in the family, that has an effect not only on the mental wellness of all of the individuals in the family, from the wife to the baby's mothers to the children's to the aunts and uncles to the brothers and sisters that are affected, down to everybody. I think oftentimes when we think about incarceration, we think about it in a singular method. For this conversation, I like to center it around mass incarceration. So, not just thinking about one family, but multiples of millions of families that are affected, and what that ultimately has as an effect on individuals. When you are a single woman seeking to be married and there are multiple individuals that are incarcerated, we need to think about it more on the macro level as opposed to just only the micro level, because individuals are affected throughout the life course. So even once individuals return back home, those effects continue when individuals are on parole and families don't have immediate access to their family members. We know the case of Meek Mill, very popular, returning home from prison and not being able to walk his son to school, which was, within eyesight that you could see. Imagine that effect on that young, beautiful prince growing to think about wanting to have that desire and dream to even just have your father walk you to school, which is not often a reality. So when we think about it, I want us in this conversation to think about it holistically on all of these levels.
I appreciate that, Doctor, because that's something that the community has been lamenting about for years. However, we didn't have individuals like yourself to articulate that, to bring that to the forefront. And we need that. We need, in order to address these issues and what you've explained, we need awareness. And I just think that continuing have these conversations is very, very important. I just know growing up in a family myself that have been affected by incarceration, I understood the impacts that it had on me. Even at the time, I knew the absence of a father. I knew that like my aunts and uncles who were incarcerated and the type of vacuum that it created in my family and the type of effect it had on me. And then just over time, learning that it didn't just have an effect on me, but everyone involved and everyone I interacted with in my entire community. So I just appreciate your articulation of that. And I appreciate you honing in on the idea, not the idea, the fact that the first community is the home. The first community is the home. And if that home is destabilized in certain ways, it's going to have an effect on the child, and this catalyzes to the external environment and just all around. So I just want to say thank you for that commentary, Doctor.
You're
So
welcome.
yeah, so with that being said, I want to kind of transition to my next question. Um, what does trauma informed care look like when extended beyond the individual returning home to include their loved ones who have been impacted by that separation in which we just discussed, and to include even the youngest in the family, like the children?
This is such a wonderful and dynamic question. I am very grateful for, being able to explore it from this vantage point. For me, I think it looks like care, right? It looks like love. It looks like empathy. It really looks like listening. I think oftentimes the adults in situations overshadow the younger individuals, feeling that they can't speak for themselves, or they're not able to articulate, or thinking about a developmentally appropriate approach to engage. I think when we think about trauma informed care, we have to also think about this as a historical, a current, and future experience. Oftentimes, when we are thinking about the ways in which individuals are affected, there are a multitude of different dynamics. You have some individuals that wear things on the outside, right? Where you're able to kind of see and project what they're going through and what their feelings. You have other individuals that act in. In the research, it talks about children and families that are affected, where you have male individuals that are young and may fight as a result of the trauma or the effects of negativity in their lives. And where you see females, you see in the research that they talk about acting in. I think when we think about trauma informed care, we have to start with the individuals themselves and give people an opportunity to explain what it is that they're feeling, and not write away their feelings through research and quote unquote expertise. The individuals that are directly impacted are the experts. The individuals' bodies that have been affected by carceral spaces understand the dynamics of that experience more than anybody could ever write about it and or read about it. That's not to say that we don't need our experts. It's not to say that there's not a lane for research, but it is to say that trauma informed care looks like sitting down at the feet of the individuals that have the lived experiences, to learn holistically what those experiences are, what they mean for these individuals, and also to understand that it's not a monolith, right? When we think about the dynamic ways that individuals are affected, there's not one single way. There is not one single story. So when we think about even the young individuals or the older individuals in the community, for example, in my research, we talk a lot about the grandmothers that are holding incarceration on their shoulders before, during, and after, the trauma effects that they have when they look at the young individuals that they saw come into life, go into the prison, come back home, go back in, come back out, with ever having an opportunity to ever talk about it. Right? A lot of our seniors are in troubled situations around trauma informed practices. And it starts with not telling them what they feel, not trying to frame the way they should talk about something, but giving them an opportunity, right? It may be at Atlantic City doing some of the things that they enjoy doing. That journaling in that space will allow them to really see the experiences. In a lot of my interviews with grandparents, they didn't know where to start. They didn't know how to tell the children the truth about the incarceration. They didn't know how to tell the story. They didn't know where they really fit in to the equation. When I talked to the caregivers that were the wives and the aunts that were taking care of the children, they all blamed themselves, to be honest. And much of the effects of what they were experiencing were that they were putting the entire incarceration on themselves and on their shoulders and burden the bear of the situation without having conversations with each other. When I talked to the children, they were upset and angry that the adults in their lives were not informed enough to understand that they just wanted the truth and that the internet was giving them a lot of it. So, with the adults trying to protect them, it wasn't as helpful as individuals thought it would be. When I envision trauma informed care, I think about it from a space that everybody gets a piece, that all of the family members have an opportunity to share what has hurt, what continues to hurt, where it hurts, how they feel that experience was, and that it be respected. I think that's the biggest piece. Oftentimes, different situations overshadow another. And I think learning from a space of respect and empathy as opposed to sympathy gives individuals who are experts in this area a chance to kind of step back and give the platform to those who have lived it and understand it so that we learn how to approach it respectfully.
Thank you, Doctor. You said so many things in there that I got excited about. I'll try to go down the line and speak to them. So first, this idea of like just we talk about trauma informed care, listening to a person, hearing them, allowing them to articulate themselves instead of trying to frame the issue and around some scientific method that you may or may not have. And when you talk about that, I think it's so powerful because when we do it that way, it allows the person to like heal themselves and kind of drive their own healing. It also makes me think about something that Dr. Mindy Fuller talks about, this idea of narrative medicine, describing their feeling, and in that process, that's where we can get to the heart of that. Because as an epidemiologist, and I understand data and should I say quantitative research, the power of it, but I think that the qualitative, which speaks to narrative medicine, is if not the same, is more important, and specifically if we're talking about engaging and healing the individual. So I just want to say to that. Also, you spoke about the grandparents, their lack of opportunity to heal and talk about these situations.
Yeah.
I think that's very important too, because the healing that transpires between, like you said, first of all, it's a communal thing. The entire family is involved. But in that same sense, all the actors need to be able to talk about it, not just
Yes.
the individuals incarcerated, not just the children, but the parents and the grandparents who oftentimes carry the burden of caring for the child when the parent is incarcerated. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you, Doctor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, on to our next question, which I think is again one of the most profound questions, and something that we really need to be discussing today surrounding this issue, which is that the reentry experience often looks very different for mothers than for fathers, and I think you hinted at that in your previous explanation. And my question for you is, what distinct challenges do returning mothers face when rebuilding family relationships, and how should trauma informed care adapt to those realities?
Oh man, this question is such a heavy question. In all of the panels that I've been on this month and for the last year and a half, there's been a multitude of conversations around that kind of duality. And I want to preface my response around the fact that when we think about the experiences and the differences between mothers and fathers, we should not be pitting brothers and sisters against each other. We should not be pitting the experience of paternal incarceration against maternal incarceration, but learning from the differences between the two. Oftentimes, I've seen it described in articles and books and different chapters where individuals are scholarly writing about the ways in which one should be benefited over the other. When we think from a Black family perspective and a family perspective, we're looking at both the mother and the father. Man, when I tell you that there is something around women and not having an opportunity from reentry um, to fully heal from the experience. I teach a course that looks at hip hop across the curriculum and utilizing the humanities to understand it. And so, from a backdrop of hip hop, we look at the ways in which hip hop artists, as fathers, have been incarcerated and returned back home, and what that looks like for women in those spaces. A small experiment to a correctional facility on the days that they have visits on the women's unit will be telling, in comparison to the side for men that get visits. One of the things that we do know is that there are not a lot of face to face connections throughout the longitudinal experience of incarceration for women. And this is troublesome. When individuals are not visiting to facilities, we know that women receive less programs. We know that women have less connections to their children through mail, call, and visits. Therefore, their experience is almost in a bubble, right? We know that having those connections to the outside world gives us an opportunity to think about the ways in which we have been traumatized prior to going to prison, during prison, and after. Without those connections to real people and to society and to what it looks like on the other side of the wire and on the other side of the wall, it means that your sentence is served in a different way. Similar to a solitary confinement, it pushes women into this solitaire that requires them to hold that burden to themselves. I think one of the things that we have to understand is that women are not forgiven in similar ways that we see males during incarceration. There's this idea and concept that a man that goes to prison comes out, he's smarter, he's stronger. You can see it physically. When women come out of prison, regardless of if they're mothers or not, they are almost dually serving this sentence over and over again, just out of the reality of who they are as women. I think that's one of the things that's not often talked about enough. It's not explored enough, but we know that it is a reality. When I work in carceral spaces, oftentimes individuals are whispering about having a mother or a grandmother or an aunt or a sister incarcerated. When there is a father incarcerated, they're saying it with their whole chest, sharing the programs that they're invested in and engaged in. When I go in for programs, oftentimes the smaller number of programs are on the female side. So this is something that we have to bring out and put a light and a microscope on so that we can explore more deeply. We know that out of the individuals that are incarcerated, 70% are parents. The majority of those individuals that have direct contact with their children prior to incarceration are women. So we know that there is a shaking up of the family locus as a result of women being incarcerated, but we don't treat them holistically in that fashion. We don't see them and humanize them in the same ways that we do other individuals that are incarcerated. Um, this is something that pushes back the ability to have trauma informed practices. I think we have to start with seeing women with children or without children as human, right? And that individuals are a part of a society where individuals are really viable of being able to receive second chances, regardless of if you are able to bear children or not. And it's something that in our society we haven't been able to fully stomach and or address.
Thank you, Doc. I really, really appreciate you highlighting that because there's a phenomenon transpiring in the country. We're seeing very, very high increased rates of incarceration amongst women, specifically Black and Brown women. And so when we talk about the trauma, the lack of trauma-informed care for women, this is something that it's a society problem, and it's something that we need to address and deal with. And you also talked about something that I think is very, very important. It really speaks to cultural norms, how we view women, specifically your articulation of the discriminatory practices toward women. For example, women not being forgiven for being incarcerated. I think that's something that as a society we do and we're not really aware of. Like you said, individuals will talk about their father, their uncle, their brother being incarcerated, but the stain is, I guess, psychologically much more deep when it's a woman in their family that's incarcerated. And I think that's the reason why that's problematic, that shame in which people may feel, is because it has a negative impact
Mhm.
on the women's reentry and dealing with their trauma, as we just articulated. If we don't recognize, as you said, their humanity, then we're not going to be able to provide them with the services that they need. With that being said, we highlighted several things in respect to this phenomenon. I want to talk about some of the ways in which we can actually address these issues, right? So the practice.
Mhm.
So my question for you is that what kinds of trainings or cultural shifts do you think staff and leadership and reentry programs need to fully embody trauma-informed care rather than just using the language of it? Because as you spoke to earlier, people may use this language, but there's so many cultural dynamics that I think it's necessary in order to provide this treatment that they actually embody these cultural shifts and dynamics.
Yeah, it's a trending kind of thing now, right? We have the person first language and individuals can study it and kind of master it like a discipline, but it's not in their heart and soul. Individuals that have been incarcerated and living in, darkness and in between these barbed wires, they can feel it a mile away and see it. It's more of the realest individuals you would ever meet in your life. So being able to have a degree and being able to have all of these different alphabet soups behind your name does not mean that your heart is purified, that you fully are vested in the work. And I think one of the things that we have to begin to see in this work is allowing individuals that are formerly incarcerated to be credentialed to do the work. What I mean by this is that they should be leading the practices. They should be the individuals that are licensed to be able to do the work. And we should be able to provide the resources for them to be able to receive that academic support to make it and to be able to own their own practices. We have to begin pouring money into being able to elevate them and not just talk about how we need it or invite individuals into a panel to share information that we then take as experts and quote unquote specialists and try to make our way around it. I think we have to start by being able to understand that the individuals, again, that live the experience have the actual answers. They are the individuals that will be able to allow us to know the ways that we can talk about things and how. I think we have to start the trauma informed care from the beginning. This should not be something that's toggled in at the end of a sentence where we have individuals fill out some paperwork. You'll be going home within 60 days, transferring you or giving you a list of organizations that you're then out on your own. These should be things that are happening from the beginning. A lot of times, individuals are coming into carceral spaces with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, that are then duly layered upon from the incarceration experience. How do you then unstack all of that at the end of the sentence? I think when we think about trauma informed care and practices, we have to think about cultural components. What is it that allows individuals to feel safe and to feel at home? That means that the individual that they're sitting on the couch may need to look like them, may need to understand their experiences, may need to play music, right? May need to have unorthodox situations that give individuals an opportunity to open up. I think that looks like creativity. We know that Black, Brown, and Indigenous individuals are innovative, they are creative. It's not your traditional kind of setting. You may go to a friend's house and be sitting eating things at the table. It may not even look like what you would think would happen inside of an actual space of care. But the space of care could also be a house. It could be, the corner outside on the corner where you're talking about things and you're feeling free and you're not feeling surveilled. It could be a multitude of spaces. I think we need to create those opportunities inside of prisons, inside of jails, inside of detention centers, in neighboring communities, and everywhere so that individuals have that opportunity. I think we need to bring in some of our indigenous practices that we know come from being Black and Brown in society. And some of that is oral history, being able to write things out, being able to talk things out. I also think that we have to think about the ways of what it means for individuals um, to be able to deal with the tears of individuals. Oftentimes, many of the individuals that I work with are not satisfied with the feedback and or the response of the individuals that are quote unquote trained in trauma informed practices. For example, there was an incarcerated brother that I was working with on death row who was speaking with an individual, over the years that was a part of the expertise inside of the facility. And every time that he shared an intimate experience, the individual next to him laughed. The response was a laugh, and it was just like, a kind of a chuckle. And so, although he continued on with his therapy, that was something that he carried out. And he felt like he was a joke. He felt like the things that he was saying wasn't respected. One of the things that I've learned from one of the experts in the field, Professor Taylor, who works out of Connecticut, that I work very closely with in the Jamie Sisterhood, is that um, the individual experts are also underneath the interview, right? It's not just the individual that's sitting on the couch. You too, as the individual seeking counseling, also has the power to be able to question and ask and make changes where you see fit for
Yeah,
individuals
and
that
I want
don't
to say
fit.
that too, Doc. I agree with you. That's something you said earlier that kind of connects to everything you've been saying throughout the entirety of this interview, which is that person centered, being able to connect back, recognize the humanity. You also talked about this holistic process about about the application of all the resources. And I want to say to you that we're kind of up against time, but we appreciate everything you've provided today during this interview. It's very, very informative. It's very, very powerful. Again, we're up against time. We appreciate you. And we're
Yes.
going to say thank you for sharing your thoughts. And we look forward to hearing you back again so you can provide us with some of your most powerful and dynamic wisdom concerning this phenomenon. I want to say again to you, Dr. Muhammad, thank you for providing us with information. And I want to say thank you to our viewers for joining us for this thought-provoking discussion. On behalf of the Fortune Society, we thank you for tuning in to both sides of the bars. If you're interested in finding out more about the Fortune Society, please check us out on the web at fortunesociety.org. That is fortunesociety.org, or on Facebook by typing in the Fortune Society. This is Reggie Chapman, and I appreciate you for joining us as we critically look at both sides of the bars. Thank you.